The notification appeared on his phone at 11:47 p.m., an hour when messages rarely brought good news. Daniel had been reviewing quarterly budget reports in his home office, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across papers marked with red ink and administrative codes. He reached for his phone absently, expecting another work email. Instead, he found a text from his wife, Victoria. Just booked flights for next month. Paris with a friend, finally using those vacation days. You don't mind, do you? 2 hearts. Daniel stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. They'd talked about Paris for years. Their 15th anniversary was in 3 months, and he'd begun researching hotels near the Latin Quarter, the places she'd mentioned wanting to see since they'd first met in college. The Eiffel Tower at sunset. The bookshops along the Seine. Café conversations that stretched into evening. He typed, "Which friend?" The 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, just Bethany from work. Girls' trip, you know how she's been stressed. Daniel set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. Bethany had moved to Denver 6 months ago. Victoria had mentioned it twice, complained about losing her lunch partner at the clinic where she worked as a physical therapist. He'd even sent flowers when Bethany left. He opened his laptop and navigated to their shared credit card account, the one they'd maintained for transparency, for trust. The Paris booking was there, 2 tickets, purchased that afternoon. But the passenger names made his chest tighten: Victoria Hartley and Connor Whitmore. Connor. The pharmaceutical rep who'd started visiting Victoria's clinic last spring. The one she'd mentioned casually over dinner a few times. He's so knowledgeable about the new pain management protocols, she'd said. Daniel had met him once, briefly, in the clinic parking lot. Young, confident, with the easy smile of someone accustomed to making people like him. Daniel closed the laptop and walked to the window. Their neighborhood stretched out below, houses with warm lights in windows, families finishing their evenings in ordinary ways. He thought about confronting her directly, demanding explanations, hearing whatever story she'd constructed. But he'd spent 20 years in hospital administration, watching people navigate crises, and he knew something fundamental: direct confrontation often just gave people time to build better walls. His phone buzzed again. "You're awfully quiet. Everything okay?" He typed back, "Just tired. Paris sounds great. You deserve a break." The response came quickly, "You're the best. Love you." Daniel sat in the darkness of his office for a long time, thinking. Then he opened his work computer and began searching through the hospital's administrative systems, not for anything unethical, but for something he already knew existed. Connor Whitmore's wife, Diane, had been a patient at their hospital network. 3 months ago, she'd undergone a battery of tests for persistent symptoms her primary physician couldn't explain. Daniel didn't access her medical records. That would be a violation he'd never commit. But he knew the protocols, understood how the system worked, how results were communicated. He knew that Diane had been anxious, that the tests had been extensive, and that Connor had taken several afternoons off work during that period. Most importantly, he knew exactly how to craft a message that would sound official without containing any actual medical information. A message that would trigger exactly the kind of panic that reveals the truth. He drafted it carefully, revising 3 times. "Mr. Whitmore, this is the Patient Services Coordinator at Riverside Medical. We've been trying to reach you regarding your wife Diane's follow-up consultation. Her test results require immediate discussion. Please contact Dr. Morrison's office first thing Monday morning. Time sensitive." He didn't send it yet. Instead, he sat with his phone in his hand, considering the weight of what he was about to do. Monday morning arrived with the usual rhythm of routine: coffee brewing at 6 a.m., the sound of Victoria in the shower, NPR murmuring from the kitchen radio about policy debates and weather patterns. Daniel had barely slept, but he moved through the morning with practiced calm, the kind that came from years of managing hospital crises where composure was essential. Victoria emerged in her scrubs, hair still damp, scrolling through her phone. Connor texted last night, apparently they're having some kind of pharmaceutical conference that week, so we might need to adjust the dates. She said it casually, but Daniel noticed she didn't look up from her screen. Whatever works, he said, spreading jam on his toast with deliberate precision. After she left, he sat at the kitchen table for 10 more minutes, watching the clock. At 7:45 a.m., a time when Connor would likely be awake but not yet at his first appointment, Daniel sent the message. Then he went to work. The hospital's administrative wing occupied the third floor of the main building, a maze of offices where the real machinery of healthcare operated: budgets, personnel, regulatory compliance, the 1,000 invisible decisions that kept a medical center functioning. Daniel's office overlooked the employee parking lot, and from his window, he could see the comings and goings of staff across 3 shifts. He tried to focus on actual work. A grant proposal needed revision, staffing schedules required approval, but his attention kept drifting to his phone. Nothing. No response. Maybe Connor had seen through it immediately. Maybe. At 10:23 a.m., his personal phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Has Connor tried calling you? He's been acting really weird this morning. Cancelled his appointments at our clinic." Daniel felt his pulse quicken but kept his response neutral. "No, why would he call me? I don't know. He just seems freaked out about something." "Won't say what?" Daniel set the phone aside and returned to his computer, but 5 minutes later, another message arrived: "He just left. Said it was a family emergency." This is so strange. Through his office window, Daniel watched the parking lot. He didn't need to see Connor to imagine the scene: the panic of receiving that message, the immediate attempts to call the hospital, the automated systems that would confirm Dr. Morrison was indeed a physician in their network, that there was indeed a patient services coordinator. Everything technically true, nothing actionable. His desk phone rang. The caller ID showed an internal extension: Jamie Reed, his colleague in patient relations. "Daniel, weird question," Jamie said. "Did you authorize a callback message to a Connor Whitmore? His wife was a patient here a few months ago, and he's calling frantically about test results. But when we pulled her chart, everything was resolved. She was discharged with a clean bill of health back in October." Daniel kept his voice steady. "That wasn't from my office. Might be a mixed-up message from another facility? Maybe. But he specifically mentioned our patient services coordinator and Dr. Morrison. I'm trying to figure out if there was a clerical error. Could be a scheduling system glitch," Daniel offered. "We had that database migration last month. I'll flag it for IT to investigate." After Jamie hung up, Daniel sat motionless, processing. So Diane's tests had been fine. All clear. Which meant Connor had never told her about his relief, had probably minimized the whole situation, or perhaps she didn't even know he'd received today's message. His phone buzzed again. "Victoria, Connor went home. His wife didn't even know he was coming. She texted me confused. This is getting really weird." Daniel typed back, "Maybe give them space? Sounds like personal stuff." "You're right. Just concerned." At 2 p.m., Victoria called. Her voice was strained, professional distance barely maintained. "Can you come home? We need to talk." "What's wrong?" "Just come home. Please." He found her in the living room, still in her scrubs, holding her phone like evidence at a crime scene. Her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed but dry, past the point of tears into something harder. "Connor called," she said. "His wife Diane is furious. Apparently he got some message about her medical results, rushed home in a panic, and when he burst in talking about hospitals and tests and emergencies, she had no idea what he meant. So she called the hospital herself." Daniel sat down slowly. "And?" They told her all her results from months ago were normal. That she'd been discharged. That there was no follow-up needed. Victoria's hands were shaking. But Connor had never told her that. He'd been telling her the doctors were still reviewing things, that they'd hear back eventually. Diane said he'd been distracted. Distant. And when she pressed him today about why he was so panicked, why he would react so strongly to a message about her health, she stopped, looking directly at Daniel for the first time. He told her about Paris. The silence in the living room felt dense, almost physical. Victoria stood by the window, backlit by afternoon sun that turned her hair into a copper halo, her shadow stretching across the hardwood floor toward where Daniel sat. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler system activated with its rhythmic click-click-click, absurdly normal against the moment unfolding inside. He told her everything, Victoria continued, her voice hollow. About the conferences where we'd talk for hours. About the dinner last month when you were at that budget summit in Chicago. About Paris. She turned to face him fully. Diane called me. She was screaming so loud I had to put the phone down. She said Connor had confessed to having an affair, that he'd been planning to leave her. Daniel remained still, his hands folded in his lap. Is that true? Was he planning to leave her? I don't. Victoria's composure cracked, her hand going to her forehead. We talked about possibilities. About what if. But nothing definite. Nothing real. Paris seemed pretty real, Daniel said quietly. The tickets were real. She looked at him sharply. How did you know about the tickets? You texted me about Paris. I checked our credit card. And you saw Connor's name. I did. Victoria sank onto the couch opposite him, suddenly looking exhausted. I was going to tell you. After the trip. I was going to figure things out and then tell you. Figure what out, exactly? She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was smaller. Whether I wanted this marriage anymore. Whether the person I've become is someone who can fit into the life we built. She met his eyes. We haven't been happy, Daniel. Not really. Not for a while. He wanted to argue, to list evidence to the contrary, the anniversary dinner last year, the weekend at the coast 2 months ago, the 1,000 small moments of companionship. But underneath his hurt, he recognized the truth of it. They'd been partners, roommates, co-managers of a shared life. But happy? He couldn't remember the last time they'd laughed together spontaneously, the last conversation that had lasted beyond logistics and schedules. So you found someone who made you feel alive again, Daniel said. And you were going to go to Paris, see if that feeling was real or just the excitement of something forbidden. Yes, Victoria whispered. And Connor was going to do the same. Test drive a different life. We weren't trying to hurt anyone. Daniel stood, walking to the window she'd vacated. The sprinklers had moved to another section of lawn. He could see Mrs. Patterson 2 houses down, collecting mail from her box, waving to someone across the street. Life continuing. Diane told you about the message, he asked. She said Connor got a call about her test results. That it triggered some kind of panic attack, he thought something was seriously wrong with her. That's when everything fell apart. Daniel turned around. Did she say who the message was from? The hospital. Your hospital. Victoria's eyes narrowed suddenly. She mentioned patient services coordinator. Dr. Morrison. He watched her mind work, saw the moment comprehension arrived. You sent it, she said. It wasn't a question. You sent that message to Connor. I didn't create any medical information, Daniel said calmly. I didn't access patient records or violate any privacy laws. I sent a message suggesting he contact a doctor about his wife's results. Which was technically accurate, she did have results on file. You knew it would, Victoria stood abruptly. You engineered this. You set him up to panic, to expose everything. I redirected an existing problem, Daniel corrected. Connor was lying to his wife about her medical situation. He'd been keeping information from her, letting her worry unnecessarily because he was too preoccupied with our affair. He emphasized the possessive deliberately, to close that loop. I simply reminded him that deception has consequences. By terrifying him? By making him think his wife might be dying? By making him face the reality that he was already lying to her, Daniel said, his voice harder now. You both were. To your spouses, to yourselves. You were building a fantasy on a foundation of deceit, and when pressure was applied, it collapsed immediately. I didn't create that fragility, I just exposed it. Victoria was shaking her head. This is insane. You manipulated the situation like some kind of chess game. I gave truth an opportunity to surface, Daniel replied. Connor had a choice when he got that message. He could have called his wife calmly, checked on the situation together. Instead, he panicked and exposed everything because he knew, at some level, that what he was doing was wrong. That's not manipulation. That's consequence. You had no right. I had every right, Daniel interrupted, his calm finally fracturing. You're my wife. We took vows. And instead of coming to me with your unhappiness, instead of trying to fix what was broken, you bought plane tickets with another man and lied about it. So yes, when I discovered that betrayal, I took action. Was it conventional? No. But it was honest in a way neither of you were being. Victoria sat back down, her face in her hands. Diane is going to leave him. She told me she's filing for divorce. That's her choice to make. And us? Victoria looked up. What happens with us? Daniel returned to his chair, suddenly feeling the weight of his sleepless night. That depends on whether you're here because you want to be, or because your escape plan imploded. The next 3 days existed in a strange suspended state, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Victoria stayed in the guest room. They moved through the house in careful orbits, speaking only when necessary, each interaction weighted with everything unsaid. Daniel went to work, managed meetings, approved requisitions, maintained the facade of normalcy. But at night, alone in there, his bedroom, he lay awake replaying 15 years of marriage, searching for the moment when they'd lost the thread of each other. Had it been gradual, an imperceptible drift? Or was there a specific moment he'd missed, some crisis point where they'd chosen routine over reconnection? On Wednesday evening, Victoria knocked on his office door. She was holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Can we talk? She asked. Actually talk? They sat in the living room, the wine between them, and for the first time in days, they looked at each other fully. I spoke with a therapist yesterday, Victoria began. An emergency session. I needed to process everything. Daniel nodded but said nothing. She asked me what I was running toward with Connor, or what I was running from with you. Victoria poured wine into both glasses with unsteady hands. I realized I didn't have a clear answer. I was just running. From what? From feeling invisible, she said quietly. From the sense that I'd become a supporting character in my own life. You have the hospital, this important work. You make decisions that affect thousands of people. And I go to the clinic, treat patients with repetitive strain injuries and post-surgical rehab, come home, manage the house, and wonder where the person I wanted to become went. Daniel absorbed this. You never told me you felt that way. Would you have heard me if I had? Victoria asked, not unkindly. When's the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about logistics? About who's picking up groceries or whether we need to service the car? He wanted to argue, but the examples that came to mind proved her point. I thought we were comfortable. Comfortable, Victoria repeated, tasting the word. Yes. Like an old sweater that doesn't fit anymore but you keep wearing because it's familiar. They sat with that for a moment. Connor made me feel seen, Victoria continued. He asked questions about my opinions, my interests. We talked about books, politics, philosophy, things that had nothing to do with appointment schedules or insurance claims. It felt like being alive again. And the affair? Daniel asked, making himself use the word. Victoria took a long drink of wine. We kissed. Once. After that dinner last month. In his car, before he dropped me off 3 blocks from here. She looked at Daniel. That's all. Everything else was emotional. The planning, the anticipation. The Paris trip was going to be when it became physical. So it was an emotional affair building toward a physical one. Yes. Does that distinction matter to you? Daniel asked. She considered this. I don't know. Does it matter to you? I think betrayal is betrayal, Daniel said. The specifics matter less than the intent. You were planning to leave this marriage in everything but name. And what you did to Connor? Victoria challenged. That message, the manipulation, was that revenge? It was exposure, Daniel said. You both wanted the thrill of secrecy without the consequences of truth. I forced the issue. By traumatizing someone into thinking his wife was dying. I sent a message asking him to contact a doctor about test results. His panic revealed his guilt. Daniel leaned forward. Here's what I've learned from 20 years of hospital administration. Systems fail when people avoid addressing problems directly. They build workarounds, create shadow processes, ignore warning signs. And eventually, something catastrophic happens because everyone was too comfortable with dysfunction to fix it. So you fixed it by blowing everything up? I brought the problem to light, Daniel corrected. What happens next is up to us. Victoria refilled her glass. Diane is divorcing Connor. She's taking their daughter and moving to her mother's in Oregon. Connor called me yesterday, desperate, saying he'd made a terrible mistake, that he loved Diane, that he'd gotten caught up in fantasy. How do you feel about that? Abandoned, Victoria admitted. Which is insane, because I was the one who was married. But I also feel relieved. Like someone pulled me back from a cliff I didn't realize I was walking toward. Daniel stood and walked to the window, his default position for difficult moments, he realized. The therapist you saw. What did she say about us? She asked if the marriage was worth saving. If there was enough foundation left to rebuild on. Victoria came to stand beside him. I couldn't answer. Can you answer now? She was quiet for a long time. I don't want the marriage we had. The comfortable, invisible routine where we coexist but don't really connect. If we stay together, everything has to change. And if I can't change? If this is who I am, someone who buries himself in work, who solves problems through systems and analysis rather than emotional connection. Then we're already over, Victoria said simply. We just haven't admitted it yet. Daniel turned to face her. I haven't buried myself in work because I don't care. I've done it because I'm afraid I'm not interesting enough, deep enough, to hold your attention otherwise. That my value comes from being reliable and competent, not from being compelling or exciting. It was the most vulnerable admission he'd made in years, possibly ever. Victoria's eyes widened. You think you're not interesting? I think I'm predictable. Safe. The kind of person you build a life with but not the kind you write poems about. Daniel. Victoria's voice caught. I fell in love with you because you were thoughtful and steady and saw patterns no one else noticed. Because you could take chaos and find the structure underneath. I didn't want poems, I wanted partnership. Then why Connor? Because somewhere along the way, partnership became obligation. We stopped seeing each other. She touched his arm tentatively. What you did, sending that message, it was manipulative and calculating. But it was also the most emotionally direct thing you've done in years. You saw a problem and acted on it, instead of managing it into spreadsheets. That Friday, Daniel left work early, something he rarely did, and drove to the botanical gardens on the edge of town. He and Victoria had come here on their third date, 19 years ago, walking through the Japanese garden while she'd explained the symbolism of koi ponds and stone lanterns, her face animated with enthusiasm he'd wanted to spend a lifetime watching. He sat on the same bench they'd shared then, watching autumn leaves drift across still water, and called Dr. Helen Reeves, the psychologist who ran the hospital's employee assistance program. "I need a referral," he told her. "For couples counseling. And individual therapy for myself." "Of course," Helen said, professional but warm. "Can you tell me a bit about what's happening?" He gave her the abbreviated version: marriage in crisis, betrayal on both sides, fundamental questions about whether the relationship could be salvaged. "Both sides?" Helen asked gently. "You said betrayal on both sides." Daniel watched a koi surface, its scales catching light. "I manipulated a situation to expose my wife's affair. I used my professional knowledge to engineer an outcome I wanted. I told myself it was about truth, but it was also about control. About punishing them both for making me feel powerless." There was a pause. "That's very honest self-awareness. It doesn't make it right." "No," Helen agreed. "But awareness is where change begins." That evening, Daniel came home to find Victoria in the kitchen, actually cooking, not reheating leftovers or ordering takeout. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the house. "I made an appointment with a couples therapist," she said without preamble. "First opening is Monday at 6 p.m. I'm going regardless." "You're invited." "I called Dr. Reeves today," Daniel replied. "Asked for individual therapy recommendations." Victoria turned from the stove, wooden spoon in hand. "You did?" "I need to understand why I chose manipulation over confrontation. Why I thought engineering a crisis was better than simply asking you if you were having an affair. Would you have believed me if I'd said no?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "Probably not. Which is its own problem. If I can't trust you, and you can't talk to me, we're already finished." They ate dinner together at the table, another small act that felt significant. The pasta was overcooked and the salad slightly wilted, but they stayed through the entire meal, talking. Not about the affair or the message or the crisis, but about smaller things. An article Victoria had read about innovative physical therapy techniques, Daniel's concerns about hospital budget cuts affecting patient care, a documentary they'd both wanted to see. It wasn't comfortable conversation. There were long pauses, moments of awkwardness, the sense of two people relearning a language they'd let atrophy. But it was real. On Monday, they sat in Dr. Patricia Wong's office, a comfortable space with soft lighting and abstract art that suggested calm without insisting on it. Dr. Wong was in her 60s, with silver hair and the calm presence of someone who'd heard every variation of human struggle and still believed in repair. "Tell me why you're here," she said, addressing them both equally. Victoria spoke first, outlining the affair, the message, the collapse of their carefully compartmentalized deceptions. Daniel added his perspective, trying to be honest about his motivations, his fears, the cold calculation behind his choice. Dr. Wong listened without judgment. When they finished, she asked, "Do you love each other?" The question hung in the air. Daniel looked at Victoria, really looked at her, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident, the way she tucked hair behind her ear when thinking, the familiar geography of a face he'd known for nearly 2 decades. "Yes," he said. Victoria's eyes filled. "Yes. But I don't know if that's enough." "It's not," Dr. Wong said bluntly. "Love is necessary but insufficient. You need trust, communication, shared vision. You need to choose each other actively, not passively accept each other's presence." She leaned forward. "Here's my assessment after hearing your story. You're both intelligent people who've let your relationship run on autopilot while you pursued individual paths." When Victoria felt unseen, she sought validation externally. When Daniel felt betrayed, he responded with control rather than vulnerability. Both are survival strategies, and both are destroying your connection. Can we fix it? Victoria asked. That depends entirely on whether you're both willing to do the hardest work, being honest about what you need, asking for it clearly, and accepting that you might not get it. Dr. Wong looked between them. This will require vulnerability from Daniel that might feel intolerable. It will require patience from Victoria while he learns to express emotions he's spent decades managing into submission. It will mean rebuilding trust from scratch, which is slower and harder than building it the first time. How long does that take? Daniel asked. Years, Dr. Wong said. With no guarantee of success. You could do everything right and still discover you've grown into incompatible people. Or you could find that underneath the damage, there's a stronger foundation than you knew. She paused. But that choice starts now, in this room. Do you want to try? Daniel looked at Victoria. She was crying silently, her hands folded in her lap, and he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her cry. Had he stopped looking? Or had she stopped letting him see? He reached across the space between their chairs and offered his hand. She took it. Yes, Daniel said. We want to try. 6 months later, Daniel stood in the kitchen making coffee while Victoria packed lunches for the hiking trip they'd planned. It was Saturday morning, early enough that the neighborhood was quiet, late enough that light was beginning to warm the windows. They weren't fixed. Therapy had revealed depths of hurt on both sides that couldn't be resolved in neat sessions. Victoria still sometimes withdrew when feeling vulnerable. Daniel still sometimes retreated into analytical distance when emotions overwhelmed him. But they were learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Connor and Diane had divorced. Victoria no longer worked at the clinic where Connor had been a regular visitor. She'd taken a position at a sports medicine facility across town, working with athletes on injury prevention. She came home energized now, talking about research projects and new techniques with the animation Daniel remembered from their early years. He'd reduced his hours at the hospital, delegating responsibilities he'd held too tightly for too long. They had a standing Friday date night, nothing elaborate, just dedicated time when phones stayed off and conversation went deeper than logistics. It wasn't the marriage they'd had before. That version was gone, dissolved in the acid of betrayal and forced honesty. This new thing they were building was more fragile, more deliberate, and somehow more real. Victoria looked up from the sandwiches she was making. You're thinking loudly. Just remembering, Daniel said. The message? All of it. How close we came to ending. She came to stand beside him, shoulder to shoulder at the counter. Do you regret sending it? He considered this carefully. I regret the manipulation. The lack of trust. But I don't regret forcing the truth into the open. We couldn't heal what we wouldn't acknowledge. Even if the method was questionable? Even then. He turned to face her. Though I hope I've learned to choose honesty over engineering. Victoria smiled, a real smile, reaching her eyes. You're getting better at it. Therapy is helping. We're getting better at it, Daniel corrected. They finished preparing for the hike, moving around each other with the practiced coordination of long partnership, but with a new awareness that made each interaction conscious rather than automatic. As they loaded the car, Daniel realized that this, the mundane morning routine, the shared task, the small jokes and gentle corrections, this was what he'd been fighting for. Not the drama of crisis or the intensity of revelation, but the possibility of ordinary days made meaningful through choice. On the drive to the trailhead, Victoria reached over and took his hand. Thank you, she said. For what? For not giving up. Even when I did. Daniel squeezed her hand. We're not finished yet. Either of us. No, Victoria agreed, looking out at the road ahead. We're just beginning. Behind them, the city receded, with its hospitals and clinics and offices where they'd lost themselves in work and routine. Ahead, the mountains rose against morning sky, promising nothing except the challenge of the climb and whatever view waited at the summit. They drove toward it together, imperfect and uncertain, but finally, genuinely present.